Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. We've got a special guest this week, Glen Trosch, who is an expert on concert posters. He has an auction house called Psychedelic Art Exchange, and he's here to give us some information on some of these posters. Glen, why don't you introduce yourself? Welcome.
Thanks, Terry. I appreciate being invited here. I love to talk about posters and culture and music and wherever you want to go with this. Thanks for having me.
Oh, awesome. No, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself here and give us an introduction real quick.
Oh, well, all right. I guess in this context, I've been a collector of paper things all my life. I grew up in a family that ran a wholesale distribution agency of periodicals, and I was surrounded by magazines, comic books, newspapers, paperback books my entire life. I learned to read from Mad Magazine and Peanuts, and I always kept the stuff too because it was always available to me. So I've always been surrounded by stacks of paper. The poster thing that evolved through my love and passion for music and live music and recorded music and all things music, and that gave me a connection between collectibles and music after records and whatnot. My first serious collection though was the underground comic books of the 1960s. That's why I got this Zap Comics here. This is where I started. I was way too young when I turned onto this stuff, and it was just yeah, it really was exciting, great illustrations, and that sort of started my path down 1960s counterculture art and collectibles.
So am I getting this right that it was the underground comics that first dragged you in and then
Yeah.
the music came later?
Well, I'd always been a fan of music, but collecting the posters came later. Um, yeah, I used to go to the comic shows and dig under the tables to find these underground comics because the dealers didn't have them out on the table. And this late 70s, and it was still hard to find this stuff. It wasn't all centralized by the web, but yeah, it was fun and exciting, and that whole adventure of being a collector and finding stuff, and just one thing leads to the next, and eventually it did lead to the concert posters because I went to San Francisco to see the Grateful Dead and went looking for comic shops in San Francisco and Berkeley, and some of the same dealers had these posters, and it started opening me up to this. And then oh God, I was at out at the bar before a show, and a friend of mine pulled out this poster and showed it to me, and it all came into focus. It was a reprint of the Hawaiian Oxamoxa by Rick Griffin, and he had just bought it from Ben Friedman, who had a shop in Columbus. Ben was the guy that bought up all the stuff that was left over from Chet Helms and Bill Graham. And he had this gig going for years. He was this character, and that's where I started in San Francisco with Ben Friedman.
Is that the poster, Matt?
Yeah, that was the poster, Matt.
Where was that located? Was that in the kind of the
It was
North Beach
it was
area?
in North Beach. Yeah, it was right on Columbus, near Vesuvius and all those cool places and the strip clubs, and it was right in the heart of it. Yeah, and Ben was a character. He would carry on. It was you had to devote like a whole afternoon to him because you couldn't just walk in and get something that you wanted. You had to go through this whole routine asking him, and then he'd forget, and then just to keep you talking and keep you there. That was my opening experience to buying posters, and I bought just for design and just for band. I wasn't thinking about them being worth anything. I took them. I mean, in fact, the first batch I ever bought, I got dry mounted, which is kind of a sin. It destroys value, but I didn't care. It was all about image. And then, I would go back every year to see the Dead play New Year's Eve. That was like an annual event for me. And then I got more deeply into the posters and would go out again in the summer for Greek shows and met Dennis King, and it grew from there. And it's always just been an exploration of art, culture, music for me. And then through that, it ended up into enterprise just by, the magazine business went away, and I had to figure out what to do with my life. And I had a collectibles business on eBay for several years of general music memorabilia. And at some point, um, I started focusing on posters because I started, talking about collectibles with my former business partner, Scott Tilson, who has an auction site as well called Art of Rock. And Scott was, he was looking at this in, a much more serious collector's way. He was a coin guy and he had a lot of experience in the finest level of collectibles. And he was turned on by this because he was into music too. And as a customer, I started buying the stuff for him, and the whole thing evolved over the years, to the point where graded posters started happening. And this was, again, something that Scott was real familiar with coins. Yeah. And it was, CGC took a chance at grading these posters. And that's a whole nother topic. We could talk for an hour about grading and how it affects posters and everything and whatnot. But that's been a serious element of how this market has transformed over the past several years. It hasn't taken off to the level of, baseball cards and comics, obviously, because of the quantities. It's difficult to have enough examples for a grading scale to be relevant, especially here. Now, the place where it is relevant is in the Bill Graham BG posters and the Family Dog posters because it's a series. There's enough examples. There's a real relative collector's scale that we can look at. So it's still a niche thing, though. That's the where transcending or growing to the level of those mass market collectibles is it's not really within you know view for us because it is it's much scarcer, it's much more difficult to wrap your head around. That's why CGC in their grading they've only selected two publications of the 60s material to use as the criteria for grading, which leaves out more than half of whatever has been printed. It's a bit unwieldy for a company like that because this was printed in many different ways in underground kind of scenarios where, promoting a show and putting it on. Anyhow, it's all over the board. We can go on for hours about how this has evolved as a collectible, but we're still sort of a niche cultural collectible.
You
Where,
know,
yeah, go on.
sorry to interrupt. I hear what you're saying about the nicheness of it, and I would say even the broader poster collecting market, without addressing the graded posters, is still kind of a niche. Mainly because I think that there's no checklist and there's no there's such a high barrier of knowledge needed to understand what you're collecting when you find something on eBay, to know whether or not it's real, to know whether it's a first printing, to know you have to have that experience. And I'm excited that I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow the base of collectors of this because music is a universal language and it appeals to everyone. But there is a hurdle of getting people up to speed. Does that ring true at all?
Oh, absolutely. This is something that I deal with all the time. Outside of these series of posters, almost everything is an individual, unique item, especially when you bring into consideration grade. So it's difficult for new collectors to get into because there's so much uncertainty. Those of us that have been collecting for years learned in the trenches and took our medicine too. You get beat up when you're learning something. And even as a dealer, you have to be so careful about, pirates, restoration, fakes, all of the things. So it is still a bit of of a minefield, which is why CGC, for whatever level they've taken it on, brought some expertise to it. It's never been fully embraced by the original collectors, and that's sort of where we're at right now. We're at the place where the people that really originally that collected this are starting to either leave this plane of existence or believe that they might, and starting to do something about it. So it's starting to come out. But this, more than any collectible I know, has been held so tightly by collectors because there's such a personal connection to it. People don't like to let it go. It's very, there's a lot of stashes of this stuff still, but people just want to be with it. I want to be with it. I've managed to somehow control the collector urge a little bit by having this auction, so I can just watch the stuff flow through and handle it and satisfy a lot of that connection. But yeah, but this is where we're at. These collections are starting to come out now, and it may be a little more than the current market can absorb. So really our biggest challenge is finding new collectors, finding the next generation of collectors. And a question I get asked a lot is, will this matter in 5, 10, 50 years? I mean, this whole first of all, I don't think that rock and roll is going anywhere. I think that the interest, I mean, the Grateful Dead still exists, or still in some form is out there, having shows. And, I went out and saw the most recent incarnation of it at the Sphere. I mean, all the latest technology. This is still a lot of people interested in this. And there's a whole level of interest in posters too, because at every rock show or every show that I go to, there's posters at the merch table now. That's what this has evolved into these like buying a t-shirt, you now buy a poster. They're no longer used to advertise the shows. So posters, rock and roll, it still has legs.
Well, I my what you're saying I can totally relate to. I think that one of the big challenges for posters is because there is such a barrier of knowledge to people understanding what's out there, what they have, what they're looking at. It's more important than almost any other collectible for there to be figures and faces that people can trust. In baseball cards, it doesn't matter there doesn't have to be a face of someone to explain to you what it is. You pick up a baseball card, you look at it, if you know the player, you can research that player. It's a cool looking card, and you don't really need anyone telling you what you have. But in posters, to have someone who's an expert explain to you what it is, how rare it is, whether or not the concert even happened. Some of these were canceled. Insightful stories about what happened at the show or the significance. That is so helpful, and that's why people like you, I think, are so important in growing the hobby, because they're very scarce. Uh, First of all, it's very scarce to find people who know what they're talking about. But second of all, there's also this very kind of like closed off aspect of collecting posters where people don't like to share the information because, like you mentioned, you pay your dues to figure it all out. And there aren't people who are like willing to share all that with the world. And that's unfortunate because I think that would bring in a lot of people. Does that ring true at all?
No, that's a really, really good point. Um, Doot, doot, doot. Somehow I cut off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, perfectly.
Okay. All right. It's just my head. But anyhow, that's a really good point. And yes, people don't want to give out that information for free, and because it gives them an edge in buying. That's also the thing. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of human nature. Now, this is where I believe that the dealers have done a poor job here as far as collaborating and creating a database or creating shared information, at least an understanding of pirates and bootlegs and whatnot that would make it a safer market for someone coming in. Yeah, you're dealing with a lot of that. There's all of this information lives in the heads of 10 to 20 people, and they're people. They're not going to be here someday. It really would be tremendously helpful to the health and future of this collectible to have a database, to have some forum where these issues about all this could be discussed and played out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about sports cards a lot because that's an area that I've spent a lot of time working in. And there are these apps now where you can hold up your camera on your phone to a card, and it will tell you exactly what card it is and all the information, and it's right there. And I'm just thinking, how great would that be for the poster collecting hobby if you could go to a flea market, hold up your phone to some random poster, and it would tell you all the information about it? It would make you I think it would dramatically grow the hobby.
Absolutely. The issue is that, like, as a business, the total dollars that this pulls in is in a collectible is meager compared to, and to fund something like that requires money. Now, the auction dealers, to a certain degree, have been preserving this history and creating that database, but it's diffuse and it's hard to search. It is, we're doing the work. We just haven't put it all together. It would be a big project. And it's something I've thought of, discussed with many people. I've known people that have, gotten into this hobby that were excited about that idea, about really creating, a forum, having a database that was a living, breathing thing. And then that would give, you know, as far as finding out what's out there, that would give some indication too. It's really, it's a beast with a lot of arms. That's the thing. It's hard to wrap your head around all of this. But yeah, we ought to start. If there was some sort of communication and collaboration between the existing dealers to create some sort of central source of information, it would be astounding. Yes.
Well, these are all great points, and they're very typical of the conversations that I have with collectors and other dealers. And it's great to give our audience just a little bit of sample about the kind of topics that people are talking about. Why don't we, if it's okay with you, why don't we switch to a little bit of show and tell? Do you have some items that you're willing to share with us today?
Well, I didn't know how this conversation would go, but I will show you a few graded posters and talk about them. I guess the area of expertise which I'm most comfortable is the Grateful Dead, because I was a lifelong fan. I came to this collectible through it. Yeah, again, it's so vast, and it really, I mean, the band created more gig art poster than anyone else, and it's still like it's endless. There's still new discoveries. It's really kind of wild that there's, having a complete collection is, I don't know if it's even possible. But again, if there was a database of every Grateful Dead poster and flyer, but it would take a collaborative thing with collectors. But anyhow, these are a handful of posters that have been graded by CGC, and they're important for various reasons. This is from the Family Dog series. There were two dance halls in San Francisco at the height of the 1960s hippie thing in Haight-Ashbury. It was the Avalon Ballroom, that was promoted by the Family Dog, and then there was the Fillmore that was promoted by Bill Graham. Both of these series created a lot of posters, and that's essentially what a lot of the grading is. This was by Wes Wilson, who was the father of the psychedelic concert poster. He
Hey, Glenn,
started, yeah,
can I interrupt you for 1 second?
sure.
Is there someone adjusting lighting over there?
No.
Oh, okay. Because it's the poster is very clear, but then it gets very bright and hard to see. But it looks great right now. If there's no one doing anything, maybe it's just something with the
Or I can send you an image and we can you can just plug it into the,
perfect.
it might be the camera might be doing some auto adjusting. I have a lamp over here and I have the windows shut. Generally this is but there is some reflection, so it might be an issue.
We'll do that. We'll put up a photo for
All
the
right.
audience afterwards. But keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, it's fine. So the Avalon Ballroom and the Fillmore created the primary series of this. This is by Wes Wilson, who was the father of psychedelic concert posters in San Francisco. This was is FD12. This is the first time that a skeleton was used in association with the Grateful Dead on a poster. So it's a very important piece in that regard, that it's a Wes Wilson piece and that it's the first use of this is 66. This is early. The scene is still emerging. It's still thing. And then we have another Wes Wilson poster. This one's from the Fillmore. And, he did 50 or 60 posters for the Fillmore, whereas he only did the first, you know, like 12 or 13 for the family dog. And Wes is, he really developed this lettering style, super important, in the history of it all. Everybody borrowed from that and carried it forward. And then we have one from the Carousel Ballroom, which was a short-lived venue that was managed by the bands, Dead, The Airplane, Big Brother, Quicksilver, I think. This was the first show. This was it was Ben Franklin's birthday, and this was done by Gut, who was a Hell's Angel. And this is just really puts you there. This is 68, right as the thing was opening. It lasted less than a year. Bill Graham wouldn't stand for it. He ended up buying the place and it turned into the Fillmore West. So that's sort of the example of graded posters, because that's something we've been talking about. This thing is so diverse that there's so many directions to go. I mean, how many even different categories of posters are there? There's concert posters, promo posters, head shop posters. And that's even, each of those are independent studies. And again, yeah, it's all too much for anyone to put together individually. So, perhaps as the beast of AI unfolds and can gather this stuff a little bit better, I guess we'll get closer to, you know, a better answer of what's out there. But right now, it's boundless.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point that there are just so many types of posters, even. I wasn't even familiar with the term concert posters until I, started having conversations with people who really knew. And, once I realized that having a date and a venue and information like that on the poster kind of made it special. I started looking specifically for those because I thought that was so much cooler than the other types of posters, the promo posters, or posters that you pull out of an album, or um, what do you have a favorite type? I mean, obviously you deal in concert
I
posters.
mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, all right. So the sweet spot for me, again, is where I kind of meet that world of collecting underground comics and these rock posters where they crossed over, where the comic artists did posters. That's sort of a place where I like to play. Also, huge fan of Frank Zappa and the Mothers, and have really spent the past 15 years trying to get every piece. Again, it's kind of like the Dead. There's just more than I can wrap my head around. But those have been the two focuses of my collecting within concert posters. Yeah, I collect art of all kinds. It's more than my walls can hold here and at my home. And yeah, it's just the thing about the concert posters is like you say that they existed for an event. In fact, some of the understanding that we have of tours and rock history have come off of these posters. They're the only remaining artifacts. And there's this whole subgenre, the cardboard stuff, the letterpress, the globe posters that was printed here in Baltimore. That it's all fascinating. The more I dig into globe, the more I'm into that. It's letterpress with screen printed day glow backgrounds to make the letters pop. That's probably the rarest stuff there is, which again, it's hard to create a collector's market when there's ones and twos of things, because if somebody can never get a copy, it kills the enthusiasm. But yeah, there's a lot of that. There's so many directions. The new prints, the screen prints, some of them are beautiful. Artists like Chuck Sperry and Emick, they're doing creative work. It's amazing. There's something about paper and ink for me. Yeah, it goes any direction that you can think of.
Well, a few things. One, I see that beautiful Frank Zappa Globe poster behind you, and Globe is actually my favorite type of poster. The cardboard boxing style poster with the day glow colors, as you mentioned. I think they're so unique and such a part of popular culture history that many people don't even know that that's what they're called, Globe printing posters from Baltimore, but they recognize those iconic images and associate it. Sometimes they associate the poster with the artist because they've seen, these iconic images and they didn't know that's what it was called. But beautiful, and we're going to have Bob Cicero from Globe Printing Posters on the podcast. We're soon, and excited about that. But there's such a rich history with Globe. Um, the other thing I
What
thought that was really interesting that you mentioned is that when these artists are you mentioned Chuck Berry and Emick, and I remember going to a Hall of Flowers trips uh, uh, poster fair, the annual poster fair, the Rock Poster Society out in San Francisco with the Hall of Flowers. And I'm sure I met you at one of the early ones that I had gone to, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And I remember talking to Emick, and he was telling me how much he was a fan of Robert Crumb, of course, the artist who did that Zap comics that you had on your easel as we started the show. And I think that is so cool how, you talked about a current artist, and obviously they're an artist, so they're very aware of these people like Crumb who are very influential. But you had mentioned, earlier, is there going to be a next generation who collects this stuff? And that's really what gives me hope. I mean, to to frame it in a sports card analogy, no one alive today is watching Honus Wagner play baseball. Very few people alive today were watching Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle, right? But these cards are at all-time high values and all-time collectability.
Yeah,
And
and these globe posters are the tobacco cards of the rock posters. I see these eventually being those really chased items. You should consider talking to Duke Zimmerman. His family was, it was globe poster before it was sold to the Ciceros. He's printing a book that's coming out. It's a good discussion. Yeah, this globe thing has opened my eyes because of the Baltimore connection. I mean, the printing presses are at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and so it really, and they still use those presses. And the globe rock and roll stuff, that is the scarcest of all. There's like one known Hendrix or Zeppelin. These posters happen. I mean, the Stones 65 sold for, a big result. It's these things are, yeah, these, but again, it's if you go with all of the heavily designed and illustrated stuff from the 60s, it's a different beast. Yeah, this is simpler, but I do equate them to the tobacco cards. As far as the new artists, yes, and being influenced, they were also influenced by all the artists that did the San Francisco posters, and that is like music, how it evolves. It is going to be an artist that was turned on by this. There were only a sum of their influences. R. Crumb was a fan of Mad Magazine and Basil Wolverton and all that. That all, it's like music. There's a direct line from Louis Armstrong to Jerry Garcia. And now it continues on with a kid like Billy Strings. It's like not done by as long as people are creative and turned on by this and influenced by art, music, and the things that brought me here, then it is endless. Will and collecting. I mean, it's a strange little sort of dysfunction, I would say. There's something not right with collectors that they have to do this. It's a hunter and gatherer thing that's just in our DNA. I don't know. Because it's people that aren't collectors, they're like, okay, they'll buy a reprint. They don't care. Doesn't mean anything. It's like having the object only means something to a select few people.
Absolutely. I kind of think that it's like you find these people that are on the same wavelength as you, and they maybe it's because of the universality and the appeal of the art of someone like Robert Crumb, where everyone can appreciate it. And
But not everyone. That's a big statement. I mean, there's some people that are like horrified by him, but
well, not so
yeah,
much the adult
yeah, yeah,
messages
yeah.
of some of the underground comics, some of the
But keep
sexuality.
on trucking. Yeah, that's like a big image in our, universal consciousness.
Or just
Yeah.
it's almost like Fleischer art or some of the
Yes.
early cartoons where visually it's very appealing and easy. It's approachable. Like if you look at a Crumb face on some kind of character, whether it's a milk carton or a spool of thread or whatever it
Oh
is,
yeah.
and his eyes, and it's like it's very easy for a child to look at it and be very interested in it. It's easy for anyone to look at it and be interested in it. Then when you get into the adult themes, it turns some people off with the sex, the race, the politics of it, and it's very adult. But you look at the people who collect Chrome, and they're very influential in the arts. They're very whether they're you know musicians like Janis Joplin, who had him do the cover art to Cheap Thrills, or you know, uh, you know. Members of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young who collected Crumb, or uh, uh, filmmakers like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg or Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, there's such a wide range of artists who are interested in the underground art, and Crumb definitely seems to be like at the forefront of
Oh,
that. But I don't.
easily, easily, he's the most visible, yes, and the most collectible. His pieces have set the records. He is that guy, but and his work sort of it started sweet. He did, I don't know if you've ever seen like the greeting cards he did for American Greeting or the Tops cards. It's all very innocent, but then he went to San Francisco and dropped acid, and then took on all of these themes. He's brilliant. He's like one of my favorite illustrators, and but it came from Mad Magazine was irreverent. That's where he got his irreverence. That's where a lot of people got it from Mad.
I totally
Yeah,
agree. Mad is present in all of this.
yeah,
Super influential, and I think a lot of our popular cultures comes from that.
yeah. And they took shots at everyone. They were universally, that's kind of something that I missed. That there was something. Everything's so watered down now with tech, and there's and the web, and it's so everyone is playing their own movie, and there used to be these spots where we sort of cultural reference points that we could agree or disagree upon everything, like music. Even the pop music now, I have no idea. I can't even grab a song out of the air, but it used to be something that was on the radio and you heard that. Creedence Clearwater Revival, it's like those songs I heard when I was a kid, and they're just like in there. Everything's too watered down nowadays, which is why something like this is niche and not mass market.
The one question that I have in my mind, because I often find myself expressing sentiments like you just did, is has it really changed, or are we just older and the next generation uses different forms of technology and different systems to access this information? Because when I speak to young people who are in their late teens or early 20s, who are very artistic and you know, uh, the kind of people who I would associate myself with, that they are getting this information from all kinds of sources that I just wouldn't have the ability to interface with.
I mean, yes, it's very helpful to have so much information, but what I find equally is that physical media, physical objects aren't as important to them. They're like, what do I need the original for? I have this image, I can print it out, or the streaming of music. It's not the highest quality. I still have hi-fi stereo. I can't listen to like bad sound. And that is, it's not as important. I think that having the the object is not as important when you can have access to everything. I don't know. We'll see how it plays out.
Well, I would make the point that record collecting is at an
Yeah,
growth in record collecting is at an all-time high. And, certainly you could avoid having the physical object if you wanted to in that
yeah.
case, but people are seeking it out. I would also say that these objects that we love are so expensive now. I mean, to get one of these posters, one of these rare posters, it's not cheap. And I think that is a barrier for young people. Like they can't be going out and spending thousands of dollars on a poster when they're, in their 20s, I mean, it's you know, um, I certainly wasn't when I was in my 20s. So, it's not, I don't think that's fair to kind of like, but I do see, for instance, like the brand Supreme, trendy brand of urban clothing, limited clothing. There's a, there's a sweatshirt with Frank Frazetta, a painting on it, an image of the Death Dealer. And, one of the baristas at my local coffee shop bought it and loves it. And it's like he's really into fashion and he acquires these pieces and he loves the imagery. And he had no idea who Frazetta was. But that being on that sweatshirt is kind of like opened up this door of exploration for him. And, it opened up this conversation between us and talking about Frazetta and his early comic book work and his Conan stuff. And I think there's lots of avenues for young people to get involved in this stuff, whereas for us, it was just hearing it on the radio.
That's that makes a couple points. Apparel is become a huge collectible too. The concert T-shirts, because most of them deteriorated. This is a surprising rock and roll collectible. But that wasn't the point we were making. That these images still live. Yeah, I mean, there's kids wearing Grateful Dead shirts that have no connection to it, which is, yeah, it's part of the pop culture. And that's apparel, but going out of your way to spend $500 on a t-shirt, that's different than, finding it at Urban Outfitters or something. I'm just saying that it plays back to my point, is that everything can be reproduced. That I ought to be selling these reprint posters from the 60s because they're pretty available and they were printed right around the same time. From a collectible standpoint, they're pretty good, but they sell for sometimes 500th of what the original is. It's just, collectors want the original object. Yeah, well, are there still young collectors coming up that want to throw money into stuff? I mean, I get a few young collectors, but most of the people on my list are, of an older demographic.
It's interesting. I don't know the right answer. I just
Yeah.
know that a lot of people spend a lot of money on prints and reproductions.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, sometimes the commercial poster, I mean, that's why there's all these head shop prints. That's why this stuff, and none of this was meant to be saved. That's the thing. It wasn't this was disposable art or disposable advertising. That's what's different about the gig prints that are coming out now, these beautiful screen prints that are sold at shows, and there's this whole collector market, but it's all tied to the individual band, whether it's Fish or Dead and Co. or Billy Strings or whatever. It's very fan centric. It's not there's not a lot of crossover.
Would you say, um, I mean, how would you describe Bill Graham's innovation in hiring these amazing, and we haven't mentioned Rick Griffin yet, who obviously we have to talk about, besides Crumb, he's the other artist that I feel like just, I really discuss him a little bit, but what about Bill Graham's innovation in hiring like these just insanely talented artists to do these posters? He had to be aware of the collectability of it. He had to be aware that, that these were maybe not going to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a piece, but can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, Bill was a collector. Bill did have this stuff and he kept it. I mean, he his archive is what became Wolfgang's Vault. Bill was a showbiz guy and he knew of, posters from theater and all that, and he was, familiar with it. And then whatever, at that explosion that of where San Francisco, LSD and rock and roll, that he was pivotal in all that, and he had great vision. His first few posters for like the mime troupe benefits are very plain, so you can see where he was reading the audience too. So he was into it. But he was a businessman. He paid as little as he could to have this done, but it was still a good buck back into the day for some of these guys, and they were getting their art out there. I mean, Wes was pretty bitter about it his whole life that he didn't get paid, well by Bill and all that. And there was he was it was not like he loved the artists or they loved him, but after a while, just like the bands, actually Bill was the guy. He was the one that it would have all got faded into obscurity if not for Bill Graham. He really was this tenacious force behind it that kept this thing going. And the whole thing wouldn't have happened without Bill. He got a lot of heat for being, a capitalist and all that, but Bill was the man. Yes.
I went to
Yeah.
his memorial concert in Golden Gate Park, and
Really.
it was insane. But I would say a lot of young people don't even know the name Bill Graham, and it's such a shame. They know Live Nation, and they kind of know, maybe they've heard of some of this stuff, but like, I mean, what an influential promoter and for someone for music, and I mean, you mentioned the Mime Troupe, and I believe Spain Rodriguez did some of the early Mime Troupe posters, and another underground comic guy, and I guess I want to ask you that I'm skirting around the issue, but San Francisco just seems to be this hub where all this stuff came from. I mean, Crumb was selling Zap comics out of a baby, carriage on Hayden Ashbury. All these poster artists converged there. You've got Moscoso, you've got, Rick Griffin, you've got, all these comic book stores. You've got Gary Arlington there. You've got tell me a little bit about San Francisco and why was that the place where not only were these artists but also the musicians congregating there? I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, it's the city itself. It was always, about dreamers and explorers, the gold rush, all, and it always had kind of a Wild West outlawish kind of quality as well. So yeah, it's like Paul Kantner said 42 square miles surrounded by reality. It was just this magical place, and if you've ever been there, there's the whole feel of it. And then the beat thing with Ferlinghetti and City Lights and uh all of that, and then the pranksters thing that flowed through that. It was just, yeah, there was something in the water, and it was also, it was LSD. It was that crossroads of creativity and this mind expanding, property, that it was just the perfect storm. It was, it was the high point of the 20th century, in my opinion, maybe in American culture altogether. It was all of those qualities of freedom, exploration, and a goddamn good time. That was it more than anything. Was everybody wanted to be at the party, and that was the best party ever. And that's what drew a lot of these people together, as much as anything. But California's its own thing. It's just that, and especially there, and it's so different than any other city, San Francisco. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? Is that?
Yeah, it wasn't even really
Yeah,
a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
It was more like an
Yeah.
observation. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, it's just so special, and that was the home of the Dead and the Airplane and Quicksilver and all of that, and the Human Bee, and it was just a rare time. And yeah, the underground comic movement came out of there, and that brings us back to Rick, who was a Southern California guy. He was from that whole surf culture. That was a whole different thing, cars and surf. And Rick came up to see what was happening and got turned on. And then the combination of his talent, turning on to psychedelics, being immersed in all of that, he was the visionary. He was the guy that was, he brought, yeah, everybody loves Rick. It's really the artist of the era. Granted, all of them were wonderful, but Rick's imagery somehow just, it was from another land.
yeah, I mean, when I think about the music, and this is just my opinion, it's probably ill-informed, but when I think about the art of rock and psychedelic art, I think of Griffin. I think of Sunday Funnies. I think of, I think even guys like Crumb or Moscoso. Um, I don't, I just feel like Griffin really had his thumb on something special. How do you
Yeah,
feel?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, he did the masthead for Rolling Stone. The album cover Oxa Moxa, that Grateful Dead album cover is just, it's visionary. Yeah, he was at the center of it, just, and his relationship with the Grateful Dead and all of that just was, well, again, the high point. I think that was the high point of it all. To be in San Francisco, 67, 68, it started getting a little bit top heavy then. Runaways came, and it just, the scene couldn't handle it anymore. But that, it just seems like a brilliant, I kind of, I was a kid. I was born in 63, and the images came to me more through Peter Max or Rowan and Martin Laugh-In. It came more through TV than, I didn't know about that. But then when I, got a, copy of Oxymox and saw that, that was something. And the 105, that was another image that came through early. A couple of these started poking through. And yeah, and it was Rick. It was just so powerful.
Yeah. One more point about San Francisco. I think it's not just the artists and musicians who are there, but the whole collecting aspect of it seems like it came from there. I mean, you mentioned Friedman and Poster Matt. Another guy who I know, who I probably visited in the 90s was Phil Cushway at Art of Rock. Andrew Hawley was out there. I've seen Pete, uh, what's Pete's last name at Heritage?
Pete Howard.
Pete Howard. I've seen, obviously Jacaber Castor was in New York, but he came from Berkeley originally. You mentioned Dennis King. I mean, these are like heavyweight names in poster collecting. Yourself, I think I met you in San Francisco. For some event there. San Francisco, obviously New York has its share, again with psychedelic solution, and Baltimore with Globe and yourself, and but San Francisco again, even on the collecting side, seems to be just such a hub.
Well, it was the central distribution point. First of all, that's where it all happened originally, and that's where it all came from and went elsewhere from there. But there was also a different method of advertising in San Francisco than in New York. You know, New York, it was all the bills and they were all just pasted up and never lasted. There wasn't a big poster scene. Bill Graham at the Fillmore East made only a few posters. It was mostly the playbills because it was just that West Coast East Coast thing. And then the poster thing survived in the Pacific Northwest. That was, it never went away. There's something about the paper and posters in the West Coast. I don't know if it's cultural or whether it's economic or what, but that it's a different deal. But that's where it all started. And any dealer that, was trying to bring out collections being in the city when you have people coming out of the closet say, I found this under the bed, whatever, where else are you going to be?
Yeah. Um, I think back to some of the comic book and comics dealers in the Bay Area. I mentioned Gary Arlington, who I had the pleasure of meeting later in his life, and he showed me on his sleeve he had tattooed the Galunatics from EC Comics, which I thought was the coolest thing I had ever seen. Um, but obviously, San Francisco Comic Book Company, and also Bob Bierbaum.
Yeah,
Is he still
Bob and
related?
yeah, and Grant worked for him and before the poster gig and yeah, it's all the freaks that are into this in the city are, going to work in a comic shop or a record store. That's where we hung out.
Yeah, such colorful characters.
Yeah, man. I mean, all collectors are sort of colorful characters. We're just this strange hybrid of people that are into something specific, and whatever it is, that you got to have the physical object. It's like I say, it's a genetic error.
I don't know if you have other posters to share, but we do something called a lightning round. Would you be interested in playing along with that?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so what the lightning round is just, you know, 30 seconds. It's not, we don't time it or anything, but I'm going to name a poster and you give me your thoughts on it. And we'll end up putting the poster up on the screen so people can see. Um, all right, let's start with the first one. First thing that comes to your mind, and remember, a lot of our audience may have know nothing about this poster. First thing that comes to your mind with when I say BG 105.
The Hendrix Fillmore Winterland poster. The first thing that comes to mind, Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy was the coolest, the most, Jimmy was this spirit that came down and did his thing and then left. I mean, Hendrix was the quintessential 60s rock star. There was nobody with style cooler than him. And then, Graham blew it the first time he came through. He was like third on the bill and it was like an okay poster. So he went to Rick and said, do your best thing ever. So those two forces coming together, that makes it the story. But and yeah, how's that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
is it fair to say the BG 105 is one of the most sought after posters in all of collecting?
I think everybody has to have that in their collection. I really do. It is, and it's yeah, absolutely. That is the poster child. Either that or the FD-26, the Skeleton and Roses. Those two kind of carry the torch, and those are the ones that get the value. But yeah, that one, it's Rick. It really is the high point. It is the cover of whatever book on this topic that you could have.
Yeah, I mean, that image of the flying eyeball is just as iconic as it gets.
Yeah, that's it, and it's yeah, it's beautiful, it's strange, but it's Jimmy. That's it. Without Jimmy, if it was for canned heat, it wouldn't be the same thing.
That's a great point. All right. Well, you just mentioned it, but number two is the FD-26. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, that was the birth of the Grateful Dead. It was a complete yeah, again, this image that was cut out of a library book by Mouse and Kelly ended up being the symbol of the band and still lives today. That is in every way the heart of San Francisco in 1966. That's sort of the piece. In fact, the zigzag, I don't want to steal your thunder, but the zigzag was very popular back then too, because borrowing trademark art wasn't done in parody and satire, and Mouse and Kelly were worried about that. But yeah, that skeleton, it's got a mystical quality to it. It was, yeah, taken from the Rubaiyat of, it was an illustration for the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is this mystic epic poem. So it's, yeah, it's very, yeah, it's ethereal. It's kind of weird in many ways.
It just struck me. I mean, Mouse and Kelly, between the skeleton and roses and the zigzag, I mean, that found art to me is kind of as impressive as anything that Warhol did.
Oh yeah, well that's yeah. I mean, well Andy was, Andy was Andy. Andy was into attention and Andy was into, being Andy. These guys were um they were hot rod guys. Kelly was a pinstriper and Mouse was doing, the monster art at shows and airbrush, and they came together in San Francisco because of the freak scene and then created these, they were pushing edges and they were just doing what they could. But the zigzag, that was the most popular poster back in the day, and it doesn't come up in good condition. It's lost some of its shine, I guess, because of the simpleness of the image or the coloring, because everyone wants the, highly illustrated, very colorful pieces. But that piece is, one of the top three or four in the Family Dog series, next to the FD-26 Skull and Roses.
All right, next on the list, we've already kind of mentioned it, but the Hawaiian Oxmoxa.
I mean, that was the first poster that I bought from Ben Friedman. That was the one I had to hang out all day in his shop to get a copy of the reprint. That poster's turned me on since the first time I ever saw it. It's my favorite image. I would like to own an original. I have a handbill and it hangs, in my room. That is my favorite Rick Remigio. It's on my screensaver. I can, So yeah, that's sort of, yes.
What about
That's
that? What about that? Talk a little bit about the actual poster. What about it?
A, that it brings Rick's surfing culture thing into it, and it's, it's around the same time when, yeah, he was doing the Oxymoxa, and it might have even predated the Oxymoxa if I recall, but it's just the symmetry, the color, the surfing eyeballs. It's just so cool. And it was a rare poster, canceled show. It's hard to get at all. It just maybe my favorite Rick piece. I love the hog farm piece too. Just Rick in that period when he was it was it was just, but that's a hot poster. That's always been my favorite for whatever reason.
There was some rumor that maybe Rick had pulled off the top few copies that have been thrown away because someone didn't pay the printing bill. Is that true, do you think?
There's a lot of legend and folklore around this piece. I've never been able to 100% confirm it, but the story goes was, yes, the gig was canceled and the printer didn't get paid and threw away most of the copies. I know that Rick had handfuls of these uncut proof sheets that he personally had. But yeah, that's part of the legend, was that that and again, I've never been able to get 100% confirmation on it, but it seems about right.
All right, let's move to the next one. Uh, how about the Trip, Velvet Underground at the Trip in Los Angeles?
Love that poster. A, that it's cardboard, B, that it's the Velvet Underground. I mean, the whole story behind those shows are so great. I mean, it got closed down. It was the Velvet Underground were not happening in San Francisco during Flower Power. It's such a great piece of history. I don't know if you've seen the Velvet Underground documentary, but them sitting in black by the pool, and it was just that brief period. There's that quote by Cher that saw the trip and said it was an alternative for suicide, and it was just. And then you have the little soup can kids. It's and the Warhol, the Lichtenstein kind of pop. Yeah, that's such a whole complete poster. That's the other side. I mean, the Velvet Underground's the other story. That's New York at the same time, and they're like not having the hippie shit at all. Like they were, into speed and heroin and being dark and all kinds of sexual depravity and whatever. Yeah, that's a cool. The Velvet Underground is another one of those sweet, sweet spots because they were such an influential band, and that period, that first record with Andy and all, so many crazy stories. Yeah, love that. That's a good one.
I think actually, thinking back to when I first met you, you had a portfolio with you in San Francisco and you had that poster in it.
It's such a yeah. It's That's a great piece. That's the Warhol Velvet Underground stuff is always what I thought could sort of break through with this collectible, that maybe some of the gallery scene or whatever, which is more of a contrived market, that would somehow find interest in this. And you talk about pop art. Well, this is that was Wes Wilson was pop art. He was he wasn't as you know how should I put it? With Andy was he was he just wanted attention. Wes was trying to do something. I mean, Andy, I'm not taking anything away from him. He's wonderful and fits in perfectly. But he was a bit of a con man. I mean, but he did great stuff, and it is amazing in the pop culture of it. But it was Wes was in this culture. He was ready for I'm sorry, I just got interrupted. You'll have to cut that for a minute. Well, Wes was part of the scene. Wes came from it, as very naturally. Andy was trying to create something, and he created a scene with the factory and all that. Andy was a scene stir, and I guess in a way, yeah, he was immersed in that culture. He more created it, but Wes was. He came up right through this. But it shows the juxtaposition. But Wes took what Andy was doing and made it like into commercial art. This was commercial art. He was a lowly illustrator. He was doing advertising gigs. This was not fine art.
Yeah, I mean, it's very relatable to me just knowing a little bit of the history of comic books, and it just seems so similar. I mean, a lot of these comic book artists didn't get paid a lot. They got paid per page, and it was a living. It was they made this art to pay the bills. It wasn't fine art, and um, now to see all these movies and billions of dollars they're making, and even the original art from the comic book selling for sometimes millions of dollars a page. And these knowing these artists got paid maybe $150 a page to make it, and I could understand some of the artists like Wes or other artists, comic book artists, feeling a little bit upset that they didn't get to participate in that. But that isn't that the story of artists in general, or
Yeah, it's a tough gig, and especially when they see their posters selling for thousands of dollars down the road, they're like, and they didn't keep any of them. That's sort of now. I mean, guys like John Van Hammersveld made a career out of it. He started with these gig posters, and then he became, he got to be a big deal. He did what Magical Mystery Tour, Exile on Main Street. He got some big gigs, and he was an illustrator, but he was able to game it more. So it's also, but yeah, the starving artist, it's yeah, it's too much of a cliche and it's too real too. So,
Well, there are
but
guys
yeah,
today like, sorry to interrupt you. There
yeah,
are
it's fine.
guys today like, you mentioned Emick and Sperry, and like these guys have certainly monetized, through prints and through kind of like more, the addressing the collectability and been able to monetize it better than their predecessors. And that reminds me of kind of like the NBA. I mean, you look at some of these amazing legends from when I grew up watching basketball in the 80s, and they'll tell you that like, some new rookie today is making in their first year what they made in their whole career. And you're just kind of like, whoa, there's a little bit of asymmetry there, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's just a problem with posters. I mean, it seems like, and everyone, today, if you're born today, the opportunities to monetize things through influence and exposure are just exponential compared to what they used to be.
Yes, it's a completely different world. And these guys were bohemians too at the time, getting whatever the money they got from Bill was good. They were part of the scene. They didn't, they were part of this great thing and they were enjoying it. I mean, a guy like Chuck though, I mean, he's brilliant and he's got a formula and it's gorgeous stuff and the printing. I mean, his it's an evolution. If Rick had had the access to modern printing techniques and stuff like this, imagine what he would have done. But yeah, but Chuck's a superstar. He really, he has carried the whole thing forward. Emick too is and fun, but yes, the the torch is still carried.
Would it be okay to finish up with a few of these more in the lightning
Sure,
round?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Uh, how about the BG 74?
The Toronto, that's a tough poster. It's a great image. It's the dead in the airplane. There was supposedly a story there too where the posters couldn't get through customs or something like that, and I don't know. It's a very rare poster, and it's a lovely piece. It's one of those set breakers from the Fillmore series.
How about the BG2, the Batman?
Love that. Great poster. Again, it's sort of it's before West started developing the lettering. It's a weird poster. It the FD1 and 2 are a little strange. There's the Peter Bailey one which doesn't really fit, and then the two with the best part of it is the Batman, the cultural reference to the TV series, which was I grew up on.
You mentioned the FD1. That was next on my list, the Tribal Stump.
Yeah, that might be the one poster I wish, that I could have. It's yeah, that's a great piece. It's the Native American thing, it's Jefferson Airplane, it's Wes Wilson. That's I mean, it's a bold state. That may be the most important poster. It doesn't get the play because it's not colorful, but if I could have, considering history, design, scarcity, that poster, the large Monterey, and the Griffin human being are just three, events. They're they're markers in time as well as great pieces of artwork.
You didn't put the Griffin Oxamoxa Hawaiian in there.
Well, again, because it doesn't fit. Again, the first family dog, the human being in Monterey, that's what I'm saying. They're like events. The dead thing didn't happen, so it's not that event. It's something where it was, a number one or a pivotal event. That's what I'm talking about. That comes into to play. Yeah, I mean, standalone, the artwork, that one wins.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
gotcha, gotcha. That's totally
yeah.
fair. But I guess what I'm getting at is you have the ability to have one poster on a desert island. Which poster do you choose?
That's a hell of a question. Wow, wow, wow. Oh my Lord. Believe it or not, it would be like a 56 Muddy Waters globe, honestly, or
Wow.
yeah, or like Howlin' Wolf, something that like that. You know, those are impossible. Yeah, just because of the history and the Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. That's where this rock and roll thing started, and that's yeah, those would be the pieces.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end. Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. And if you'd ever come back again, we'd love to have you. But this has been great. I think our viewers are going to love it. And thank you very much for tuning in.
Th- Thanks for a good conversation, Terry. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, and check out